My name is Ramaya Krishnan. I'm the Dean of the Heinz College here at Carnegie Mellon, and it gives me great pleasure to invite and welcome all of you to our second of our Innovators Forum. This is not a typical lecture series. The Innovators Forum features conversations with innovators like our guest, Don Tapscott. We have a bit of a hybrid format today. Don will speak first and provide an overview of some of his main ideas for about 10 minutes. And then I'll lead a conversation with him by asking a few questions. And I'd like to encourage all of you to join in a little later with your own questions as well and take advantage of this wonderful opportunity that Don's offered us. Don's one of the leading innovators and global thinkers in the business world today. And he's been named he's number 9 on the list of the top 50 most innovative thinkers. To say logistically, we have a set of microphones set up in the aisles here. And I'd ask that any individuals wishing to ask questions line up at the microphones beginning around 5 p.m. in about half an hour. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest today, Don Tapscott. Don's one of the world's leading authorities on innovation, media, and the economic and social impact of technology. And he advises business and government leaders from around the world. Over the past 30 years, he's introduced many groundbreaking concepts that are part of contemporary understanding. He's a prolific author, authored or co-authored 14 very widely read books, including multiple bestsellers, The Paradigm Shift, which explained how technology can enable a transition to a new enterprise and successes in a new form of business enterprise. And I'm sure this is something that we can relate to here, certainly at CMU. And his 1995 bestseller, The Digital Economy, changed thinking about the transformational power and nature of the internet, which we are beginning to see even play out even more so nowadays. And 2 years later, he defined what he called the net generation and the digital divide in his book, Growing Up Digital. A book that I read fairly recently, which is a very major bestseller, was Wikinomics, How Mass Collaboration Changes Everything, was the best-selling management text in 2007, has been translated into more than 25 languages. The Huffington has nothing less than a game plan to fix a broken world, and I'm sure all of us are interested and excited to learn more about what Don has to share with us today. This past November, as I mentioned, Don was named to the Thinkers 50 definitive list of top 50 business thinkers in the world, earning the 9th spot on the list. Beyond these books that have defined the digital revolution, Don's work continues as a chairman of an international research think tank, Moxie Insight, and he's also a member of the World Economic Forum and a professor, an adjunct professor of management at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. So please join me in welcoming Don Tapscott. So let me turn it over to you, Don.
Well, thanks very much. I'm delighted to be here. And I've had a series of very interesting and stimulating conversations. And one of the reasons I like to come to leading universities is I always meet some amazing students, and that's happened today, in addition to some faculty. I'm not going to give a big speech. I just want to introduce a single idea, and it's the idea of my new book, Macrowikinomics. And then we'll have a conversation. I hope that you'll feel free to ask any question or disagree. I just came with a great session with first-year IS students who disagreed with much of what I had to say. And we had a terrific conversation. This guy, Paul Krugman, writes for the New York Times, Nobel Prize-winning economist. For some reason, he and I get invited to speak at the same conferences recently. And he gets up and he says, look, when you have the meltdown of a financial services industry, you get a couple of decades of ugliness. Japan had one in 1992, and they're still in a slump. So get ready for 2 decades of slump, and that's the good news scenario. Because some bad things can happen, like one of these countries in Europe defaults on its sovereign debt, the EU collapses, Europe goes into a depression, the global economy goes into a depression. It's one of many worse scenarios. So I get up and I say, look, far be it from me to debate a Nobel Prize-winning economist, but I have a slightly different view. I think that the future is not something to be predicted, it's something to be achieved. And we can achieve a very different future than the one that he's just outlined. But to do that, we need to know what the problem is. And the problem doesn't fall within the boundaries or the mental model or the paradigm of traditional economists who worry about things like the business cycle and about, should we have more fiscal stimulation or austerity or whatever. I mean, these are all important things, but this is not a cyclical change that we're going through. It's a secular change. That arguably, many of the institutions that have served us well for centuries are at various stages of being stalled or frozen or in atrophy or outright failure. And arguably, the industrial age has finally come to the end of its logical time. It served us well, and it can no longer advance our institutions and take us forward. And we need to rebuild all of these institutions around a whole new set of principles, around a new model, and around a new communications medium, which we happen to have, called the Internet. And the reason I wanted this slide up here is every one of these is sort of like a 2-hour discussion. And so I thought, but it might at least stimulate you in the questions to wonder about one of them, or as many as you want. Don't worry, I won't talk for 2 hours on each of them. But for every one of them, there's a stark contrast between an old industrial age radically different. So the industrial age corporation, typified by GM, America's greatest company, it went bankrupt. The financial services industry, the core modus operandi of Wall Street, almost brought down global capitalism. I don't think it's changed. Newspapers are going bankrupt. All around the world, they're getting thinner and thinner, and magazines are getting thinner, with a few exceptions. One youngster said to us, if the news is important, it will find me. Most of the students at this university don't read newspapers, and the writing's on the wall. I'm guessing they're informed, but they get informed differently. I said to one youngster, I was interviewing her in front of a large audience, I don't know, about 6,000 to 7,000 people, and 20 years old, name was Rahaf Harfouche, studying in Paris, her boyfriend's in Toronto. They turn on video Skype all day long to keep their relationship going. They cook together across the ocean and stuff like that. And I said to her, Rahaf, your generation, do you use email? And she said, oh no, Mr. Tapscott, that's yesterday's technology. And I said, well, if you did use email, what would you use it for? She says, email is sort of like a formal technology, say, for sending a thank you letter to one of your friend's parents. That would be a good use of email. So I said to her, aren't you part of the dumbest generation? It's a book by that title. Subtitle is, How the Digital Age Stupefies Young Americans and Jeopardizes Our Future. Don't trust anyone under 30. Says this professor, English professor at Emory College named Mark Behrlein. Aren't you part of the dumbest generation? I'll bet you don't read the newspaper. I'll bet you don't watch the evening news on television. You probably get your news from Jon Stewart and The Daily Show on Comedy Central. Aren't we lost because of your generation? And she says, well, I don't think that's a fair stereotype. I think I'm informed and all my friends are, but you're right, Mr. Tapscott, I don't read the newspaper. She says, putting it back to me, she says, but Mr. Tapscott, have you ever seen one of those things, a newspaper? They come out once a day. And they don't have hot links, they're not multimedia, and you get this weird black stuff on your fingers. She says, you're also right, though. I don't watch she says, let me tell you how I get informed. So she's got RSS feeds, all kinds of interactive stuff. She curates the news, and she gets a bunch of points of view that she disagrees with because she's worried that we're all going to be balkanized and end up only following the points of view we agree with, and that the purpose of information will not be to inform us, but simply to give us comfort. So she likes to hear points of view she disagrees with. She says, you're also right, I don't watch the evening news, but does anybody? Sam Donaldson told me the average age of the ABC Nightly News is 64. She says, and you are right, I do watch The Daily Show on Comedy Central. She says, but not to get the news. I don't think The Daily Show would be funny unless you know the news. So, we could go through every one of these. Now, for every one of these, there are huge challenges and issues. Look at the newspaper. We need to be able to pay journalists. We need having good quality, good investigative reporting. But now, we're seeing the contours of a new kind of network news that's possible to take us forward. So, final, just a thought on this, we can come back to these if you want, is if you want to understand what's happening today, again with respect to Paul Krugman, I don't think you go back to 1991 or 1982 or even the Great Depression. You need to go back earlier in history. And several hundred years ago, all around the world, we had agrarian societies, and the means of production, political system, was called feudalism. And knowledge was concentrated in a tiny handful. The oligopolies of the church and the nobility. And people just didn't know about things. There was no sense of progress. You were born and you lived your life and you died. But then along comes Johannes Gutenberg and his great invention, printing press. And over time, different parts of the society began to acquire knowledge. And when they did, the institutions of feudal agrarian society began to appear to be stalled or frozen or in atrophy or even failing. It didn't make sense for the church to be responsible for medicine when people had knowledge. It didn't make sense for a bunch of kings and nobles to be running everything. So we had the rise of parliamentary democracy, the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther called the printing press God's highest act of grace. Saw the creation of the modern university, science, the corporation, commercial relationships, eventually the Industrial Revolution, the creation of great industrial cities around the world, and Pittsburgh was one, and it was all good. It advanced our economy, our standard of living, but it did come with a cost. And now, once again, the technology genie has escaped from the bottle. Call it the internet. There's the digital revolution. This time it's very different. The internet, start with a printing press, gave us access to the written word. The internet enables each of us to be a publisher. The printing press gave us access to recorded knowledge. The internet gives us access not just to information and knowledge, but to the intelligence contained in the crania of other people on a basis. I don't think this is an information age that we're going to. It's an age of networked intelligence. It's an age of collaboration. So if you understand that, then, and many people do, we can now start to participate like never before in these institutions, rather than being passive recipients of all this stuff. That's the way the industrial age worked. We can be active participants and producers. Industrial age was about mass production, mass distribution, mass media, mass marketing, mass democracy, mass education. For every one of those, there's a clear modus operandi that was all about scale and standardization. It was great compared to what happened before it under feudalism. But today, it's clearly revealing itself to have limits. I just got asked about education in the last class. We have a mass production model of education. I'm a teacher of knowledge. You're a student. You're an empty vessel. You don't get ready. Here it comes. To me, the lecture is the process where by the notes of a lecturer go to the notes of a student without going through the brains of either Now, I appreciate the irony that I'm standing here giving you a lecture, but I'm not trying to, I don't think you're going to learn much from this. I'm just trying to convince you to think about a single idea. And there's a role for lectures in doing that. But we have the very best model of pedagogy that 17th century technology can provide. So on the other hand, there are these amazing innovations, and you're a real leader in this whole open university movement that are underway today to transform that particular institution for a new model. You know what? I could keep talking, but I'm not going to. I think we'll just stop right there and try and... I've convinced myself about this lecture thing, that we should maybe try and get a little more interactive.
All right, Don. Well, you seeded my first question. You said you're in the age of network intelligence, and in the example that you gave of the young lady in Geneva, you talked about her curating the news. These terms, curation, platform, and network intelligence, are important concepts that you convey in this book. If you were to pick any one of these industries, and to make things concrete, I think, for the audience, could you pick one and sort of illustrate each of these terms, curation, platforms?
Well, why don't you pick one? I mean...
Social justice.
Social justice, okay. Well, in the past, we looked upon our industrial age governments to establish laws, to have the force of law, to have police, to ensure that there was justice. And in many parts of the world, that occurred. In many other parts, was that you that asked it? Yeah, okay. A team effort. But we were passive recipients of justice, unless you were a vigilante or something like that. But today, people can participate in all kinds of ways in achieving justice. Now, in a very limited way, you can be a crime fighter without being part of the police department just by entering data into Crime Stoppers. I'm working with the city of Bogota right now that's implementing, through the Chamber of Commerce, a big network whereby people can report on all kinds of inappropriate activity that's happening, from a pothole to a robbery to a drug deal. So people can now participate. But on a much more significant level, people can have user-generated social justice in the sense that they can topple oppressors. And this started around a whole big debate in the Arab Spring. Do you know Malcolm Gladwell? You know, wrote the book, The Tipping Point and Blink and so on. And he wrote a very controversial article about this in the New Yorker magazine, and he said, you know what, social media doesn't really contribute to social justice, because real social change happens through strong ties. And he gave the example of the civil rights movement. There's 4 people in a car in Alabama, and they were doing this stuff and going out on a limb, and he says, you know, I paraphrase his argument, but yeah, sure, there's 200 million people on Facebook causes, but just because they go like, you know, they're not exactly changing the world. He called them slacktivists. So people like me got involved in the debate, and I said, well, no, actually, the internet not only drops transaction and collaboration costs in business, it drops the transaction and collaboration costs of dissent. And it enables strong ties to be formed from weak ties. I said, in fact, all ties in society that are strong begin as weak, with one exception, maybe the relationship between a mother and her baby. That one starts off strong from the get-go, although even that one kind of incubates for a while. So if we can create this platform where we can have strong, all kinds of weak ties that become stronger, that's a wonderful thing. Anyway, it was a good debate, and then reality intervened. Reality had names like Tunisia, and then it had a name like Egypt and Bahrain, and you know, it had a dozen other names, and it continues today, Syria, and so on. And the point here is that that these revolutions in the Arab Spring, wiki revolutions, They weren't caused by social media. They were caused by injustice. They weren't created by social media. They were created by a new generation of digital natives. You know, I'm a digital immigrant. I had to learn the language. Who had grown up. They had access to secular information. They were educated. They were promised a prosperous life. They came into the workforce. There was 45% youth unemployment in Tunisia. And they had no way of changing that situation because it was not a democracy. But the web and the internet enabled this user-generated justice big time. And a lot of people misunderstand that. They think, well, yeah, they use Twitter and stuff to organize a demonstration or get picket signs down or something like that. It was a lot more than that. In Tunisia, snipers were killing unarmed students in the street. And so the kids took their little devices, they took pictures of the snipers, triangulated the location, they sent the pictures to friendly military units, as there always are in a pre-revolutionary situation, because not the brass, but the rank and file are the brothers and sisters and uncles and so on of people out in the street. And the military units came in and took out the snipers. We think, yeah, social media, it's about hooking up online. Actually, for those kids in Tunisia, it was a military tool to protect themselves from murderers associated with the regime. I was telling a story earlier. Some of you were there, but I was just at a meeting of this thing called the Personal Democracy Forum in New York, and a woman had just come back from Syria. And one of the big problems in Syria, because Assad is doing the same thing, he's killing thousands of unarmed people through snipers and trying to blame the demonstrators for that. But the problem was that when a sniper hits you, you don't always die. And so what would happen is the ambulance would come in from the government, pick up the poor wounded person, and that person would disappear. Or they'd be found dead with a lot more bullet holes or something like that. So these four kids actually organized this internet-based platform to create a whole new healthcare system. They did it in a day, so that when someone goes down, they triangulate the location. Within minutes, there's a medical crew there that's part of the user-generated justice that's taking this wounded person to a little makeshift clinic. There are doctors there. They operate on them. They keep them out of Assad's formal health care system, and they're saving lives. And this was largely a Twitter-based application that these kids developed, and they did it in a day. So, I could go on and on about this, but now I said people can participate in society in ways that were unthinkable. You can not only read an encyclopedia, you can write one. You can participate in fighting crime. You can not be a passive recipient or victim of an oppressive government. You can, in ways that are infinitely more easy than my generation, the 1960s, you can bring about real change rapidly.
So, Don, if I might pursue this a little further, the notion of a platform and its reduction of coordination and collaboration costs, I think, is compellingly made in the examples that you offered. To come back to this issue of curation, do you see examples where sometimes it's the individual that does the curation, in other cases there's actually a hierarchy that does the curation, and yet other cases you look to experts like yourself to curate things for or provide signals as to which is the wheat and which is the chaff?
Yeah. Well, this is all heading in a really interesting direction, the conversation, because there's all this self-organization that's happening now in the society. But the internet is a reflection of everything that's good and bad in society. And, it will be used as a tool for people to collaborate to find a cure to AIDS, and it's also being used by some people in America who want to get rid of public education. And it's being used by evil people to organize unthinkable acts. So, it will be what we want it to be. It has this awesome neutrality. So, I'm very optimistic because I think there are more good people than bad people. But it means that we need curators. We need people who come in and participate and try and structure all this and participate in the self-organization in a way that ensures that it's positive. And people think that a lot of these big communities are just kind of amorphous mobs, or crowds or whatever, but I've studied many of them, and they all have some kind of structure. Take something like Wikipedia. How can this be that you have an encyclopedia written by millions of people? It's 10 times bigger than Britannica. It's real time. It's in 240 languages, and according to the big study that's been done, the quality of Wikipedia is roughly the same as Britannica on scientific articles. The error rate's about the same. So, how is this possible? Well, Wikipedia is set up in a way that value comes to the fore, that truth, there's lots of inaccurate stuff on Wikipedia at any point in time, as it turns out there is on Britannica. But there's a process whereby things get corrected and good value gets brought to the table. So, has anyone here edited or written an article on Wikipedia? Anybody? That's great. So you know what I'm talking about. And it's not always pretty, but you go in there and you say something that's factually incorrect, and you're going to have a rough time. I was saying to a group earlier, a small little group of students, go to Wikipedia and go to Don Tapscott and enter in. Don Tapscott is the world's leading authority on accordions. No, world's leading accordion player. Why don't you put that in? This is not true, okay? And see how long it lasts. It's just an interesting kind of thing. Please don't do that. Go to your dean's site and do it. But there'll be people all over that. World's leading. Flags are going to go up all over the place. And there'll be hardcore Wikipedians all over that. Then there's going to be a bunch of accordion players saying, who the heck is Don Tapscott? He doesn't even have a CD. So it's all about, this is leadership, but it's in a new way. It's not the old, Winston Churchill, Lee Iacocca, great leader, command and control, sell it down. It's leadership for the creation of value. So I'll just give you one other quick example. So government. Okay, we have a big problem around the world. We don't have enough money to fund our governments. And so what are we going to do? Well, raising taxes a lot is generally not viewed as a good idea. But on the other hand, don't people have a right to basic social services and to health care and to feel secure? And so the old model of government was, I'm a government, I take taxes from you citizens, I get all these people inside my boundaries, they create these services, they deliver them back to you, we hope you enjoy them. Well, there's a new model that we call government as a platform. It's actually, I didn't invent that term. I think it was Tim O'Reilly, probably, the Web 2.0 guy, that was the one who at least popularized the idea. I've done a lot of deep research in it. But the idea is that governments will continue to do that, but they can do all these other things that change the division of labor in society about how we create public value. For example, governments can just release data. You may not know this, but your governments at all levels have thousands of categories of data that they have internally. You just release this data. Raw data. Tim Berners-Lee, it's a friend of mine, he actually created the World Wide Web. At a TED conference, he had people standing up chanting, raw data, raw data. You release raw data, and all of a sudden you got private companies, civil society organizations, other government agencies, and the new fourth pillar of society, individual citizens, self-organizing to use that data to create public value, what we used to think of as services. So I'll give you a really trivial little example. I was with the, what was she called? The CEO of Melbourne. Melbourne has a CEO, Australia. And we were talking about this, and I said, give me an example of some raw data here in Melbourne. She looks out the window, she says, bicycle accidents. I said, great, police have data on bicycle accidents. Just release it, raw data. Within 24 hours, someone will do a Google mashup. There'll be a map of Melbourne showing where people get killed and all the dangerous places to ride your bike. You'll be saving lives in a week. It costs the government $0. So that's one of thousands of categories. Radon gas. Apparently radon gas is a big problem. What do? Hire armies of radon gas inspectors to be going around? Well, no. People can buy a little radon gas add-on an app for like $15. And it turns out there are tens of thousands of people in America who know about this whole radon gas thing and who care a lot about it. You just release all your data about radon gas and about how to measure radon gas and stuff like that. People will self-organize, and you'll be creating a service, public value, but only through a whole new division of labor in society. So this is like a really big area that holds great promise for reducing the cost of government and creating better quality. And it sure is a lot better than, going slashing and burning on all kinds of government services.
So the government data example in particular is very interesting about raw data. Do you see privacy as being a big issue when you talk about releasing the raw data?
Oh, well, raw data without identifiers for individual people, that's just kind of assumed. Obviously, we don't want them releasing our raw medical records. But you could release all kinds of aggregate information about ALS, and then those 20% of all patients that have ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, horrible disease, 20% of them are on a network called Patients Like Me, where they're exchanging information. Mm-hmm. Imagine if they had all this raw data about ALS, what they could do with that and how they could create additional public value.
Excellent. I think this is a perfect time to open this up to the broader audience. For those of you interested, if you could walk up to the microphone, introduce yourself by name, and ask the question. We already have one taker. That's great.
Which has come through on Twitter from AJ, and he asks, if email is yesterday's technology, what will tomorrow's technology be?
Well, I did ask her that. How do you communicate? She says through Facebook, texting, and through Twitter. And these are actually now the main ways I communicate. And I was getting more emails in 1978 than I get today. Actual, real emails that are helpful to me. And Twitter is now my newspaper. I have, and if you use Twitter, just raw Twitter, it's hopeless. But what you want to use TweetDeck or Hootsuite or one of these kind of capabilities that organizes all your Twitter feeds. So if I had a laptop here, I could show you. But I have all my feeds come in columns. There's one called Don Tapscott's Innovators. These are the 100 people I think are the leading innovators in the world in my space about how new media changes business and society. By the way, I've taken that Twitter feed using something called paper.ly, and that generates its own daily newspaper. It's called Don Tapscott's Innovators Daily. It's a daily newspaper that I enjoy reading.
Do you retweet that to others?
Yeah. Well, there's now thousands of people following my newspaper. Now, this is not a sustainable business model because my newspaper is advertising revenue that I don't get. So at a certain point, I'm going to go to them and say, either we're pulling the plug on this baby or you're going to have to cut me in for some of the ad revenue. And in that case, I'd probably give it back to the community or something. But so Don Tapscott's Innovators. Then I've got all my political people that I'm following, my economics people. I've got people talking about me because I want to know about that. I have my personal friends. And then at any other point in time, I'll have like 5 or 6 other columns of things that I'm following. And this is extraordinary. I'll just give you one striking little example. I was sitting in an airport lounge in Sao Paulo at night, and my flight was late. And this was a few months ago. And this little tweet came from one of the political people I'm following in the Mideast saying Osama bin Laden has been killed. And I'm like, well, that guy's normally a fairly reliable source. And I went over to, I Googled it and I didn't really see anything, and there was nothing on the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. And I thought, that's weird. And then another minute later, I saw something else. And about 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later maybe, I went to the Wall Street Journal, and they had a little tiny paragraph saying there's serious rumors here that Osama bin Laden's been killed. So I thought, how can I find out more about this? I went to Wikipedia. And in Wikipedia, there were already a dozen people editing his bio. So, yeah, I could have waited to read the newspaper the next day. But this is and then there's all this discussion about it and what's going on and so on. Now, I'm not a news junkie in that sense, as I want to know exactly what's happening at any point in time, but it was sort of a striking example of what young Rahaf was saying, that this is now a whole new environment of information that we individually have to take more responsibility for curating.
I should say we have more than 200 people who are not here, who are remotely watching this webcast, and therefore we have these questions. Thank you very much. Next up, please. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ben. I'm a student, a PhD student here at SCS, and most of my research is right on the topics that you talk about. So thank you for some of the very interesting patterns and things that you've identified and pointed out. One of my other areas of research, though, is about the change in social structures that these new technologies have enabled. And part of that is that you see a shift from communities that are based on these strong bonds, localized, strong bond relationships, towards more networked societies that are based on a larger number of weaker ties, acquaintance-based relationships that are better for the transfer of information rather than value. And I was wondering, a lot of that is part of the communication technology. So when two people are speaking face-to-face, less than 30% of the communication is in the actual words exchanged, 5 to 30%. But when you have texting and Twitter, and even email as a primary method of communication, you're losing most of that value. And so what do you think are the effects on people's relationships and the social structures there?
Okay, that's a great question. It's hard for me to speak to it in general in terms of my research, but I have done a lot of research about you and your generation and how you communicate. And for my book, Grown Up Digital, I completed a $4 million project. We interviewed 11,000 people in 10 countries. We watched kids, young people, on how they use technology. And I shouldn't say kids, because I'm talking about the baby boom echo here. Okay, so if you're born between 1947 and 1965, you're part of the baby boom. Then the birth rate dropped off for a period of 12 years as the boomers delayed having kids. They were the first generation to do that. And then in 1978, the boomers started having kids. And if you're a student at this university, you're part of that generation. It's called the echo. The boom, the bust, sometimes called Gen X, and the echo of the boom. They're born between 1978 and 1997, inclusive. Now, what I've found out studying over the years is that time online for this generation is not taken away from face-to-face communication or from talking to your parents, doing your homework, kicking a football, or learning the piano. Time online is mainly taken away from television. Now, the baby boomers as a generation watch 24 hours a week of TV per kid. And these kids watch a lot less TV and they watch it differently. They come home, and you'll recognize yourself, for any of you who have teenagers. They come home and they turn on their computer and they're in 3 different windows and listening to MP3 files and texting and maybe talking on the phone, and they got 3 magazines open and, a video game going. Oh yeah, and they're doing their homework. And the TV may be on, but the TV's in the background. It's sort of like music. It's like ambient media. Or else you'll have your programs that you watch, but you watch them when it's convenient to do that. So, and this is affecting, this new media diet affects this kind of stuff about interpersonal capability. That, first of all, when you're online, rather than being the passive recipient of somebody else's video, like my generation was, and you could say, no, Don, the electronic hearth, that brought the family together around the television, and we all watched the Well, I don't know about your family, if you're my generation, but grunt past the popcorn hardly, constituted meaningful interaction. Or give me that remote. But time online, rather than being the passive recipients of all that one-way video, industrial age, right? One size many, one size fits all. What are kids doing today? They're reading, they're thinking, they're organizing their thoughts, they're scrutinizing, when I was a kid, I saw a picture, it was a picture. You see a picture, you gotta authenticate it. What is it? An animation, a bot, I'm looking at the cover of Vogue on the screen. I look at that and I see a model. My daughter sees a Photoshop job. They're having to remember things. This is changing the way a whole generation thinks and learns. So during extended adolescence, age 18, that's where a third of the human brain gets wired. And the most important period is early childhood, 0 to 2 or 3. And we don't care at all about those kids. They're all left to their own. But 8 to 18, that's where your brain gets wired. And how you spend your time is the number one variable determining what your brain is like. So to come around to the question, rather than being the passive recipient of all this stuff, you're doing all this interactive activity. Plus, from what I can see, there's no material difference in the amount of face-to-face communication. Now, it's different. Young people will be standing around a group and they're all talking to each other and they're all texting stuff. And as a parent, I find that terribly annoying. In fact, with my kids, we have a rule. I say, I know you can multitask. I know your brain works differently. When you're talking to me, please look into my eyes and do not have your mobile device active. But I don't see any systematic evidence anywhere that shows that this is a generation that's losing their social skills. So that's all I can speak to. I can't speak to my generation, but I think that if this is the future, as they come into society, that we can see those trends extending. I'll say one more thing on this. This is a big topic. There's a lot we don't know about the brain. And there's a program, if you Google the nature of things, surviving smiley face, the teenage brain, on Thursday night at 8 o'clock. It's on Canadian television. I was involved in that. And the whole 1 hour show is about this issue of the teenage brain and how it works and what's happening to our interpersonal abilities. And it's an extraordinary piece of work that gets into this. Yes, sir.
Obviously, with wikis and this internet collaboration, there's a lot of strength there, and a lot of that comes from sort of the anonymity and the ease of access, but that also will sometimes bring a lot of malicious behavior. You see times when the internet gangs up on someone and goes far beyond what we would consider just or even acceptable in doing what they feel is dealing with this, whatever this is, if it's a person who made a mistake, if it's a person who's doing something they find offensive, whatever it is, sometimes the internet can be very aggressive and damage people's lives. What can we do about that tendency if we're going to harness this power?
Well, first of all, there's a big difference between, in terms of people's behavior online when it's anonymous versus if it's you. And when it's you have a reputation to behave and or to defend, and people tend to behave better. Even with anonymous people, it's most of the things I write. If I write on, say, one of these more Wild West type environments like the Huffington Post, I might get like 150 comments, and I'd say easily half of them are like, this guy has no idea what he's talking about, and it's a big sort of a rant. If someone's really malicious or off, and I reply to them, typically what happens is like, oh wow, you're a real person. I didn't really mean that. I mean, and it's a sort of an odd thing that goes on in anonymous environments. I think that that overall, though, this is about human behavior, and this is a reflection of everything that's good and bad. So you mentioned ganging up. So you remember that awful case of these girls that beat up another girl, and they took a YouTube video and they posted it, and they had their little 15 minutes of fame. And so there are all these articles about the internet is terrible and enables people to get famous doing evil things like that. So I kind of studied it a bit and I wrote about it, and I went to see what the kids actually said and what the parents said. And there was an interview with one of the parents of the girl, of one of the girls that had been the assaulters and the aggressors. And this parent said, well, that girl had it coming to her. So I'm sitting there thinking, what's the problem here? Is that we have a global medium of human communications, or that we have some really awful parents that don't teach their kids basic values? You know, so I'll just give you another example of this. It's a dicey one. Porn. It's not, it's not assault, but it's another dicey issue. When I was a kid, there was no porn. I mean, I probably could have bought a Playboy or something, but I think the shopkeeper would have called up my mother and told her. But now, kids have access. So what do you do about this? Well, I have parents saying, well, I put the computer in a public place in the living room or in the family room where I can watch my 14-year-old. We have all this blocking software that prevents our teenagers from getting access to that. And it's like, hello, did anyone notice that your 14-year-old also has a computer in his pocket? Or that he's going to see a dozen computers throughout the day where he can get access to whatever he wants. And any 14-year-old can hack blocking software. So my view is that if you think porn is a bad thing, job number one is to talk to your kids about porn. But again, it comes down to parents, and it comes down to values, and it comes down to sort of sensible, responsible behavior on the part of all of us. So, with my own family, I mean, we had to confront this early because I've been using this stuff for 30 years, and this would have been, my son was 11, so this is 14 years ago, and my daughter would have been about 13 or 14, and we decided, and you could start to get access to porn big time. So we said, well, we're going to sit down, we're going to do up a social contract. We're going to write it up, we're going to discuss it and agree on it, we're all going to sign it. And so we said to them, here's what we're going to give you. We're going to give you access to the internet from your bedroom. You shut the door at any time. We give you the highest speed possible in our neighborhood. We give you money for software and apps and stuff like that. And no blocking software. We're not going to spy on you. That's what we're going to do. So our kids are thinking, all right, what do I have to do? You have to do some things. You're going to get A's in school. You're going to be a good kid, have good values. You're going to be fit. Make sure you have balance in your life. No video game during the week, that kind of stuff. And so we went through all these things. One of them was, we only want you to go to appropriate sites. So with my daughter, it wasn't a big issue. Because girls, porn, it's gross. But with my son, he's 11. So I sat down with him. And I said, Alex, I want to talk to you about appropriate access. One of the issues in the social contract. I said, let's start with porn. Because there was safety stuff too. You never meet somebody that you met online without us coming on. So I said, do you know what porn is? He said, yes. And I said, have you ever been to a porn site? And he said, no. And I know my son. He was telling me the truth. I said, have any of your friends been to a porn site? He said, oh, yes, absolutely. And I said, well, I don't want to know who they are or anything. I just want to know what you think about porn. And so he says, well, Dad, porn, isn't that like for losers that can't get a date? And I thought, that's not a bad start. So we had this discussion about porn. I said, Alex, this is an industry. It exploits women, sometimes worse things. It can kill people. I said, but But also it teaches you bad attitudes about sex. I mean, I said, someday you're going to have sex, and it's a wonderful thing. And it's always best with somebody that you really care about. And porn takes away from all that. And anyway, we had this big discussion. So we go through it, and I said, what do you think? And he says, I buy that totally. I said, okay, check off that one. And I think it worked for a number of years. I mean, he's in his mid-20s now. He still today thinks porn is like stupid. And, you know, he's just not into that stuff. But right after that, to sort of get back, this journalist was interviewing me, and a lot of people, I wrote this up in Growing Up Digital in 1997, and that you don't use blocking software. A lot of people got very angry at me. They thought I was a bad person or something. And this one woman says, come on, Don, there's all this great new blocking software. Here's one that'll prevent your kid from taking your credit card and stealing a couple of $1,000s from you to buy video games on the internet. And I thought about it for a sec. I said, you know, if my kid is taking my credit card to steal money from me, I have a big problem, and the solution is not software. You know? My kid needs some values. The two of us need a relationship. So it's all about, you know what? In the age of Walter Cronkite, we all just sat back and we were passive recipients of media. Now, every one of us, whether we're a parent or a kid or whatever, we have to take responsibility for this stuff. And we have to bring our values to the table. And if we do this by the hundreds of millions, then maybe this smaller age that our kids inherit might be a better one.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, this is kind of a change of subject. How you doing? My name's Jayon Wang. So in your book, you mention a lot, and your previous book, technological mass collaboration. What I wanted to ask you was if you have what your opinion is on Ray Kurzweil's singularity principle, and if you have any particular agreements or disagreements, and what you think it would mean for both the United States and China's economic future within the next, let's say, 5 or 10 years.
Well, I know Ray, and he's come up with all kinds of brilliant ideas over the years, and this is one that I'm just not excited about. First of all, the idea that my body can be infused with all kinds of technology that can make me and my other wealthy friends live to be 200 years old while all my relatives and other friends die off. I'm just not interested in it. You know, honestly, I'm going to try and stay healthy and live as long as I can, but I don't want to live 200 years and be, you know, part of the tiny percent of the population that has the ability to do that. But in terms of overall his general thrust that networks are infusing themselves into billions of inert objects that become smart communicating devices and into our world, and they're leading to profound changes in every institution, of course, he's completely right about that.
So Don, we're getting close to the end of our time,
Wow.
and I wanted to make sure you have a set of big ideas for 2012 that you've talked about, and you've also been on these lists of most innovative thinkers. There are lots of our students here, and I'm sure they would like to know, how do you get to be like Don? How do you get to be an innovative thinker? And could you share, in the context of answering that question, tell us a little bit about what you think your big ideas are for 2012. A couple of them. I know you have 20 in that list.
Well, it's hard, to keep up with all this stuff. The pace of change is so rapid. We're inundated by all this information. Eric Schmidt, this is the erstwhile CEO, now chairman of Google, was speaking at a conference that I was also talking at recently, and he had this good factoid on that. He said, between the beginning of all time and the year 2003, we created 5 exabytes of information. That's a lot. We recorded 5 exabytes. An exabyte is a quintillion bytes. He says, in the last 24 hours, we created 5 exabytes of information. So, and if you tell that story a couple of years from now, it's going to be in the last hour. We created 5 exabytes of information. So it's pretty overwhelming. So how do you stay on top of this, and how do you try and be an innovator in this environment? I don't think I have a secret sauce, but I'll just tell you a few things that I would recommend. One is personal use of the technology is a precondition for any kind of comprehension. If you're not on Facebook or Twitter, or if you haven't tried out Quora or Foursquare, one of these things, I mean, just check it out. And go on to Wikipedia. Don't just look at it, edit something and see how a community like that works, and you'll start to see the implicit structure that exists in these things. Number two is, if you're older, get yourself a reverse mentor. I've had kids mentoring me for over 15 years now. I'm on Twitter because of one of them. One of my mentors, she's about 22, she's a best friend of my daughter's, about 3 years ago. She came to me and she says, Don, you got to get on Twitter. And I said, I don't want to go on Twitter. Twitter's stupid. And she said, Don, you have to be on Twitter. You're Don Tapscott. And I said, I can't say anything in 140 characters. She says, it's not about the 140 characters. You embed URLs in the character. Come on, I'm going to show you. So she sets me all up on Twitter. Now, I'm no Ashton Kutcher, but I've got like 30,000 or something, 35,000 people following me. And I wrote Macrowikinomics was largely written on Twitter. I went out, I asked questions of people, and it's now my newspaper, and it's enormously helpful. And that came about because of my reverse mentor. The first one that I had, in addition to my daughter Nicole, who was always just at a really early age, she was just into this stuff. There was a youngster named Michael Furtick, and in 1997, he was 13 years old, and in 1997, he was the project manager on my website, growingupdigital.com. They made him the project manager because he was the oldest and most experienced software engineer. And when Michael was 15, he had his own website. It was called mydesktop.com. He was getting 20 million page views a month. He and a buddy of his who lived in Australia. And they sold it for an undisclosed 7 or 8 figure sum. One of the news reports said it was probably only $1 million. And I sent him a note. I said, Michael, you sold it for $1 million. You should have called me. And he wrote back and he said, Don, legally I can't tell you how much I sold it for, but I can tell you I'm very happy. And he didn't want the money to buy a Ferrari, although he bought a cheap little car, but his mom had to drive around with him because he only had his learner's permit. He wanted the money to invest in his next new venture. It's called takingitglobal.org. One word, takingitglobal.org. This is a social network of hundreds of thousands of young people who want to change the world. So Michael became a mentor of mine. I had him on a panel once, and there were like 120 of the 150 top CEOs in America in the audience. Small group about this size, but every one of them was a CEO of a big company. So Bill Gates is in the audience. He came up afterwards, started talking to Michael, and ended up Bill hired Michael and his girlfriend as 17-year-olds to go out to Microsoft for 6 months and advise the management on how the world was changing. Because he was sort of like, we're the PC generation, and we just can't get it. You guys are the net generation. We need you to. And they had this little team of microserfs that would follow them around. And, okay, Michael, Jennifer, if you were going to have a meeting, how would you organize the meeting? And so they're all on their clipboards so this went on for 6 months. But anyway, I digress. Have a reverse mentor. And it turns out it's sort of two-way mentoring, really, because we older people, this is the first time in human history when children are an authority about something really important. I was an authority on model trains when I was a kid, and today those teenagers are authorities on this digital revolution that's changing every institution in society. But it turns out that there are some things that experience helps you know about as well. And in the workforce, we have this big generational divide. I call it a generational firewall that's shaping up as these generations bump into each other. And we need to get them together so that we can learn from each other. I mean, one of the things young people don't know so much about is stuff like privacy. That you shouldn't give away all your information. I'm convinced there are 100 or probably thousands of young people this year in America who won't get that dream job. It's looking good, and I failed the reference check. You know, the employer went onto Facebook. Tim Berners-Lee again. He says there should be a law that just like you can't discriminate against somebody based on their race or gender or age or sexual orientation, you shouldn't be able to discriminate against them for anything they put on Facebook under the age of 19. So, anyway. So, and the other thing is, if you're in an organization, you know, I think our whole concept of leadership is really changing. That the great leader that, you know, is a great visionary and sells it down to the organization as a whole. The person at the top can't learn for the organization as a whole anymore. Things are getting too complicated. And that's not my idea. That's Peter Senge from the Fifth Discipline, like over 20 years ago. But what's happening now is because of these new collaborative tools that exist that go beyond email, you know, if you implement those within a university or within a company or whatever, you know what I'm talking about, right? Industrial strength social networks, wikis, blogs, ideation tools, jams, digital brainstorms, new next generation knowledge management tools. These are the new operating platform for the 21st century corporation. You get one of those happening, all of a sudden leadership can come forward because this new environment calls forth all kinds of leaders. And if you have a platform that drops the transaction and collaboration costs where leadership can be evidence, then that's a really powerful thing. So rather than the old model of the innovator, and there are of course great innovators. Steve Jobs is a great innovator. I'm reading his book. He's a real nasty person, but he was a great innovator. But you know, but look at Apple today. I mean, it's still doing great, and it's got a great team, and there's a huge pile of human capital and a massive Apple business web and network where people are building their stuff and they're doing all kinds of things. That's creating an environment whereby innovation can come forward rather than I'm the great innovator and I'm going to come up with a vision and sell it down.
Well, thank you very much, Don, for a very inspiring set of ideas and for being so generous with your time. Please join me in thanking Don.
Thank you.